3. Hello, everybody, to GZ Truth News. It is May 14th, 2024. We have a very important guest, as always, Dr. Jim Fetzer. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Please tell us all the downloads, all the information. Thank you so much for coming and talking about all the crazy stuff that's going on. It's 24/7, never ends. Thank you.
Well, my geezy friend, it's always a pleasure. I think the most shocking development of late is that Mike Adams has put out a report that a deal has been struck to install Trump in order to bring about a transformation of America into a Zionist police state. This is extremely troubling. Let me just give you his summary. The primary movers on this deal are Zionist donors. They've had it with Biden's refusal to ship more weapons to Israel, as well as the resistance against Israel, portrayed by Democrats, against a genocide, of course. That's why suddenly a huge shift has taken place to back GOP candidates with Zionist money, which is exactly why you're seeing nearly the entire GOP throw away the First Amendment, call for the craziest, insane things imaginable, such as Lindsey Graham saying Israel should nuke Gaza, or GOP House members calling for rounding up pro-Palestinian protesters and deporting them to Gaza, where they could be bombed by the IDF. Trump is set up to be president, but the cost of that will be the end of America's speech freedom, the First Amendment, the freedom to think for yourself, especially on campus. America is about to descend to a fascist, Zionist-controlled police state. Now, that sounds far-fetched in the abstract, but the fact is, Trump called into Hannity recently, and I was appalled. I mean, listen to what Trump had to say, which is utterly consistent with what Mike Adams is reporting.
When you look at the anti-Semitism, the hatred of Israel by so many people, you go back 10 years, I mean, Israel was protected by Congress, and now Congress is just doing numbers that are unbelievable with, I think, a very, very small group of people within Congress, and it's got to stop. But we have to go back to the roots. We have to protect. We have to stop the anti-Semitism that's just pervading our country right now, and Biden has to do something. You have to get the job done. It's a horrible job to do, but they have to respond. When they do, when there's an attack, a sneak attack, like on October 7th, that's so violent and such hatred, you have to clean it out. You have to clean out the cancer, and you have to let them do their job. And frankly, it has to be done fast, because this is not sustainable for anybody. The job has to be done. It has to be done fast. The United States has to get courage, and the United States has to speak up. Nobody knows where the U.S. stands right now. I think Biden is not on the side of Israel, and he's making a tremendous mistake. You have to clean up the terror that we witnessed on October 7th. But the bottom line is they have to be able to finish the job. You have to let them finish the job. You have to support them, but they have to do it quickly. And you can't let scenes like this. The head of Columbia should be ashamed of herself. The job that she's done, she should no longer be there. She should be absolutely ashamed, because she let this take place, Sean.
You got to understand that Trump is endorsing genocide. His only complaint is they aren't doing it fast enough. In other words, they got to kill more Palestinians faster. And he's also condemning the protesters. This is very un-American, very undemocratic, very contrary to my past impressions of Donald Trump and where he has stood. Now, I mentioned in passing, there's a woman by the name of Kim Goguin who has a BitChute video claiming Trump is dead, that he died of prostate cancer, and that he's been replaced by a body double. Now, I'm not endorsing that, but I'm saying if it were true, it would certainly explain a lot, because I'm very, very troubled by what's going on here. And of course, I'm not alone. Listen to what Jimmy Dore has to say.
So now Trump has come down on Trump used to be an American first guy. He's not. He's an American first occasionally. He's Israel first. And so people who are peacefully protesting in the United States, and that's what they're doing, they're peacefully protesting, Donald Trump is siding with a foreign country over them. And he says, do you think that the radical left lunatics that are causing all of the chaos? So you think people who are carpet bombing Gaza right now, the occupiers, the Zionists, they're not lunatics? They're not the genociders? This is amazing, right? So do you think, hey, there are radical left lunatics in the country right now? They don't have any power. You know who have all the power? The radical establishment lunatics, like Joe Biden, the Democrats, and the Republicans, who all agree on the worst of things. Just like he agreed, he just got in bed with Mike Johnson, Joe Biden, to pass funding. He supported that. The more funding, remember Donald Trump used to go around saying, I'm going to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours?
Yeah.
He's not, now he's like, no, we're going to fund it. I'm funding it.
I still don't understand why they went to him at all with that. A guy who's not president that they have on trial. Hey, we need you to get on board.
We
with
need
this.
to, but they did. I guess to try to get some of the right-wing base to go along with it. So here's what he tweeted out on his Truth Social. By the way, he just got $2 billion more from Truth Social. I don't know anybody who goes on there. I had to go on there to get this though. Do you think that the radical left lunatics that are causing all the chaos at our colleges and universities are doing so in order to take the focus away from our southern border? No, I don't think that's why they're doing. Wow.
No.
Talk about bending yourself in a pretzel. Where millions of people, many from prisons and mental institutions, are pouring into our country, just asking, well, I'll let you know. No, that's not why they're doing it.
Yeah, right.
They're not doing that so like he's trying to say they're running cover for Joe Biden. No, that's not what they're doing. They're actually telling Joe Biden they're not going to vote for him, and they're actually protesting Joe Biden's policies of supporting a genocide in Gaza, which would be your same So Donald Trump and Joe Biden now agree on all the most horrible things.
And why is Ukraine getting more fucking
That's
money
right.
too? I already knew he was all the way in Zionist,
And
but
so-
Ukraine?
And here's a Trumper who we've had on the show. This guy used to be MAGA, Jake Shields. I don't know, maybe he still is, but he says Trump wants to make protesting Israel illegal. They serve the same master, and he showed this. Stop the protests now. This is what Donald Trump tweeted out on his Truth Social or whatever.
Now, you got to understand that when he consulted with Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, he sabotaged a brilliant strategy that had been crafted by the Freedom Caucus of Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene, Jim Jordan, Matt Gaetz, and others to get funding for our southern border by holding up additional funds for Ukraine and for Israel until that funding was provided for the border. Trump sabotaged it. He went in with Johnson. He knocked the props out from under him. When Marjorie Taylor Greene tried to get Johnson removed, he was supported by the Democrats. Mike Johnson turns out to be the best speaker the Democrats could have. It's all completely outrageous. So in a single stroke thereby he made what's going on in Gaza, Trump's genocide, what's happening in Ukraine, Trump's war, and all the millions of illegals pouring across our border, Trump's fiasco. I am repulsed by this. I've been a very strong supporter of Trump heretofore, but he does not have the moral character I attributed to him in the past for me to be able to endorse him as president any longer. Now, I don't know. Might I be forced to vote for him if the alternatives are Joe Biden? Joe Biden obviously is horrendous. I don't think Joe Biden's even going to be on the ticket. They're going to take him out. Some say it'll be happening in short order. June 13th, I've heard that date. And bring in Gavin Newsom and Michelle, and we'll find out if the public is enthusiastic about voting for a man with breast implants and a huge shaving bill. But the fact is, Trump has sold us out, in my opinion, and I'm absolutely shocked. Frankly, it's like post-traumatic shock syndrome. I'm feeling very, very bad about all of this. And I gotta say, Jimmy Dore's a truth teller. Jimmy Dore's telling it like he is, and I'm very impressed with Jimmy Dore. Well, what that means is we're in deep doo-doo right here in the United States. Meanwhile, Putin has fired his defense minister. He's parachuted in a Kremlin bubble with zero military experience in a sign that, this is according to the Daily Mail, Russia's hardline president wants to take personal charge of the Ukraine war. Now, let me say, Russia's been winning the war, but it has proceeded at a snail's pace. And the question becomes, had Putin somehow been reluctant to wage an all-out war and take Ukraine? Well, I think Ukraine was for so long a part of the Soviet Union. Russia's original capital was Kiev. I believe that Putin, who has vast knowledge of history, I mean, this guy is real intellectual, more so than any president we've ever had, perhaps with the exception of, say, Thomas Jefferson. JFK was pretty good. There are a few others, but the fact is he's exceptional. And I believe he's been going out of his way to preserve the infrastructure. In fact, it turns out under international law, destroying the infrastructure that maintains the life of the civilian population is a war crime. Well, Putin's been acting in accordance with international law. The Ukrainians, like the Israelis, have not. They've been violating it in every possible way, all kinds of massacres, slaughters, indiscriminate bombing, killing civilians right and left, women, children, it matters not. And if Israel has been more extreme in the numbers that it has killed, and it's not been for any duration as long as Ukraine has been, for example, began bombing the Donbass back in 2014 after Victoria Nuland engineered a coup to kick out the Russian-friendly president of Ukraine and replace him with a Western puppet of whom Zelensky is the successor. So, interestingly, Putin is making this change just when Russia is launching its Western offensive, and reports are that Ukrainian forces are crumbling. So it's right on the eve of a great military victory that he takes this measure. It is puzzling. Here's a bit of what the Daily Mail has to say about it. Vladimir Putin has fired his bungling defense minister. They use the word. Replaced him with a puppet with zero military experience and a wide-ranging reshuffle of his most senior cronies. Putin sacked his longtime friend Sergei Shoigu, 68, shifted him into the role of Secretary of Russia's National Security Council. Reports say he proposed little-known civilian economist Andrei Ilyasov, 65, to replace Shoigu as defense minister in his new cabinet. Well, many people may think that's a really bad idea. Paul Craig Roberts, whom I admire greatly, regard as our nation's leading public intellectual, for example, right? Putin needs to shake up himself. Putin is conducting a large shakeup of the Russian government. He needs to give himself a good shaking as well, writes Paul Craig Roberts. Ramzan Kadyrov, leader of Russia's Chechen province, said on Russia's Rosalia TV channel, I believe that we need to attack more actively. We need to hit hard while there is time. This month, we need to take the nearest territory. We definitely need to take Odessa and Kharkov. Then sit Zelensky down and force him to sign all the papers that Russia needs for the security of our state, citizens, and the Russian Uyghurs who live on the territory of Ukraine. This is the second Russian war leader after Yevgeny Brzezinski, the leader of the Wagner Group, expressed dissatisfaction with the glacially slow pace at which Putin is conducting the conflict. One wonders if Kadyrov will have a similar fate to Prigozhin. I, Paul Craig Roberts, am not an expert on the Russian military, My impression is that the Wagner and Chechen soldiers are Russia's best combat troops. It's a pity to waste such troops in a war conducted at a snail's pace, which has resulted in the war being greatly widened, made much more dangerous and difficult to resolve. Indeed, Putin is now in danger of NATO occupying Odessa before Russian troops can get there. If the West can keep Odessa and Kharkov out of Russian hands, the war will be a defeat for Putin. It's inexplicable that Putin takes this risk. Putin's dilemma is that a man who sees himself as an instrument of peace is a poor war leader. Curiously, Foreign Minister Lavrov says the West has decided to prolong the war. No, the prolonged war was Putin's decision. A war that should have been over in 3 weeks has lasted 27 months. Well, it's hard to argue with that. On the other hand, here we have an expert actually endorsing what Putin's doing. This is Colonel Wilkerson.
Spent 35 years, 40 years in the government is really disheartening. Really disheartening. My nation doesn't know what it's doing.
Talking about both wars.
There are two articles, one in Politico that says too little, too late for Ukraine. This ammunition, this aid goes to Ukraine. And the other article in Wall Street Journal, they're saying that by early 2025, the war in Ukraine is over and Ukraine is defeated. And
wow, they're going to give them till 2025, huh?
In your opinion, when you look at the current situation in Ukraine right now, we've learned just today, we've learned that in Kharkov, the situation is so dire. Ukrainians are just leaving the city. How do you see the current situation of Ukrainian army?
I think it's really bad. And I really am concerned about what Putin is doing. Putting an economist in charge of his forces, I think, was a smart move. I wish we'd take a lesson from him. We've gone the other way. We've put now 2 in a row, almost, close enough together to matter, secretaries of defense in there, violating all of our previous strictures, their former generals. And Austin in particular, but Mattis before him, proved why we have those strictures. You know, the only civilian control of the military under our Constitution, which exists, is the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense, who share mutual responsibility for the armed forces, with the President being the key, but the Secretary being I'll give you an example of what I mean by it's very, very close sharing. The Secretary of Defense can deploy U.S. military forces across the globe on his own. He cannot execute. He cannot say, shoot. He can put them out there. He can send them out. Now, normally they don't. Normally they tell the president what they're doing through the National Security Council. But that's the authority. The president's the one who has to say, go kill people. Now, you got them out there, Mr. Secretary. Now you can kill people. But those are the two civilians overseeing our military, which our founders would have just applauded. Put a general in there. What have you got? I mean, here's a general who, unlike George Marshall, wasn't steeped in civilian politics and all the rest of the things that you have to be steeped in. Plus, George Marshall said, I never voted in my life and wouldn't vote, because he thought, you know, you shouldn't vote if you were a military person. You should be absolutely apolitical. Now we putting these people in here, and Austin is the worst of all so far, who just, what do you think Austin says to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs or to the service chiefs? Of course you should have that. Of course you should have. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you should have that too. Oh, Israel wants this. Yes, send that over there. This is crazy. This is another example of how we are spoiling ourselves. We are defiling our own system. We're ignoring years, 2 centuries of practice and precedent in order to do things for basically political purposes. This is not good. This is not good.
basically for political purposes, meaning to benefit Israel. Meanwhile, here's a different report.
Netanyahu over the weekend told an Israeli news outlet, when he was asked how long the war could take,
Judge
he said he thought it
Napolitano,
could take 10 years. And is that realistic?
Colonel
Or is that
McGregor.
how long he wants to stay in power?
Well, the power question I can't answer. I'm sure he'd be happy to be appointed for life. But I don't think it's a matter of can it last that long. I think it's more along the lines of signaling to everyone that he's not going to stop until he's comfortable that he's achieved his goals and aims. And I still don't think anyone has been straightforward about those aims. This has nothing to do with what happened on 7 October. 7 October was horrific, although again, lots of people like me question just how it occurred and how it came about because of the extraordinarily good surveillance and security that's normally around Gaza. One wonders why they put this music festival in such close proximity to a place that was clearly not reinforced with Israeli defense forces. They had a minimum of ready deployable forces in the region. Why would you do that? So I think there are lots of questions that have to be answered on that score. I simply think that what happened on 7 October was used to justify something that the Israelis have wanted to do for years, which is to complete what they started in 48 and what continued to some extent in 56 and later on in the 60s, which is to completely rid itself or rid Israel of its Arabs. That's what this is about. I don't understand why nobody will simply step forward and admit that. I guess if you do, then you have to admit that what is happening is mass murder and expulsion. And people who are friends of Israel don't want to say that. Well, I was always a friend of Israel too, but I'm willing to say it because that's the only way I can characterize it.
Well, Colonel, you have an international reputation for intellectual honesty. You're not a politician. You're a military, retired senior military person who appears on these programs to analyze things. Most people do not have that level of integrity. But I mean, is it realistic that the Israelis can achieve their goal, the elimination of Hamas, the elimination of Hezbollah, and from the river to the sea?
Well, that depends less on us and more on the people that live in the region. Again, and I've said this before, you have this axis of resistance, as it's called, that includes very well-armed and disciplined militias in Iraq, Hezbollah, obviously, as well as the Houthis. But these are absolutely, without question, not enough. These are not going to be enough to destroy the threat that Israel now presents to Islam and the people of Islam that live in the Middle East, or for that matter, anybody that stands in their way. So I think the question has to be submitted to General Sisi in Egypt, to King Abdullah in Jordan, to the Saudis, to the Emirates, to the Turks and Mr. Erdogan, as well as to Iran. Those are the major powers. Those are the principal actors. What are they going to do? Right now in Egypt, there are people that actually believe the International Court of Justice has real influence and power. You and I both know they have no power. And so there are many Egyptians that are saying, well, at last we see movement. No, there's no movement. And the Egyptians are the ones with a force. It may not be the best force in the region, but it's numerous enough, large enough that it could do enormous damage if it chose to do so. And thus far, the Egyptians have sat on their haunches. The same thing is true in Jordan and the Arabian states. Question is, what will the Turks do? They're historically the leaders of Sunni Islam. They still see themselves in those terms. What are they doing? I don't know.
I think this is all very appropriate that between Wilkerson and McGregor, you're getting a brilliant critique. Meanwhile, we have a half-hearted report from the Department of State highlighting the double standard of U.S. official for Israel, implying basically only our enemies commit war crimes. So the Israelis obviously cannot, the United States obviously cannot be committing war crimes. Here's a bit about it from reliable statecraft. On NBC's Meet the Press Sunday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken struck back at claims U.S. officials let Israel dodge American law regarding weapon transfer, which they clearly have done. We don't have double standards, Blinken said, falsely, I add. We treat Israel, one of our close friends and partners, just as we would treat any other country. Ridiculous. Including to assessing something like international humanitarian law and its compliance with that law, which is grossly violating. I mean, every country in the world, save ours, recognizes that fact. The International Court of Justice has found it to be the case. The International Criminal Court has found it to be the case. The United Nations has found that to be the case. But we have to lie about it. Luckily for observers, it continued, Blinken has left a substantial public record against which one can test this claim, to wit that we treat Israel the way we treat every other state. His own department's statements and actions undercut this supposed impartiality. Indeed, all available evidence indicates that U.S. officials hold Israel to a lower standard than just about any other country. Take the State Department's long-awaited report on Israel's compliance with international law in Gaza, which came out last week. The administration found that Israel had likely used U.S. weapons to commit war crimes, but said there wasn't enough evidence to draw clear conclusions about specific incidents. The upshot is that, from the Biden administration perspective, there's no legal reason to cut off U.S. arms transfers to Israel at this time. It's just embarrassingly bad. This is horrific. The United States, by virtue of providing these weapons to Israel, is complicit in the horrendous crime of genocide. Let there be no doubt about it. No one who pays the least amount of attention and has any sense of moral decency can have any doubt about it. Here, by the way, is another report about what's going on.
Ban. Al Jazeera gets shut down in Israel, just as Israeli forces move into Rafah. Is Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, out to turn state-owned television into state-controlled television? And halfway through India's 6-week-long election process, we examine the narratives both in the mainstream media and on the social side. This past week offered a brief moment of hope for the approximately 1.5 million Palestinians trapped in Rafah, supposedly the last safe space for civilians in Gaza. Hamas had accepted the terms of a ceasefire agreement. It looked like lives would be saved. But on Tuesday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the proposal fell short of Israel's key demands, and now an assault on Rafah is underway. Coinciding with all of this has been the closure of Al Jazeera's news operation in Israel. Our news coverage, TV broadcasts, and website are all blocked there. That measure may shield Israelis, at least temporarily, from the horrors that are being inflicted on Rafah, but it will not stop this network from covering the story. What it does signal to the world, though, and the Netanyahu government's allies abroad, is that Israel's so-called democracy is not what it's cracked up to be.
Well, that's for sure. It's not a democracy. In fact, the Israelis made that determination, that decision about 15 years ago when they voted between having a democratic state and having a Jewish state. And they opted for a Jewish state. They have an apartheid state. It is not a democracy. That's merely more propaganda from the biggest liar on the face of earth today, Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, it's just outrageous. Meanwhile, the electronic intifada reports a student intifada has swept U.S. campuses, and they got it right. I'm overjoyed to see students rising up for a cause in which they believe that transcends their circle of friends, their invention, their cell phone communications, their other efforts in college, which of course, insofar as they are pursuing educational goals, are all highly worthy. So what we're talking about here are acts that go beyond the call of duty. They're not obligated to do this, and there is no upside for the students. They're all at risk of punishment. Sometimes they're being brutally attacked, or they're staying up for something in which they believe, which is a very good thing. Honest, noble, courageous. And the assaults upon them by the authorities, they're going to have a generation of radicalized American young people. It didn't have to be that way if we simply respected our own traditions of freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to peaceably assemble. It's a reflection of the extent to which Israel controls the United States that these young people are being treated just the way Israelis treat Palestinians, absent actually killing them in place. They're treating them with brutality. They're treating them in an utterly unresponsible and disrespectful fashion, which means it's all grossly immoral, the fundamental principle of which is to treat other persons with respect, to never use other persons merely as means, which is typified in classic offenses like murder, robbery, rape, kidnapping. Using persons as means to achieve your own goals is the core of immorality. When you treat persons with respect, when you treat them in a manner that you yourself might like to be treated, thus the golden rule encapsulates the very idea, the very heart of morality. Always treat others as you would like yourself to be treated. That's exactly right. Meanwhile, across the U.S. and around the world, student and faculty have engaged in a wave of protest demonstrations and encampments on their campuses to demand their institutions divest from companies profiting from Israel's apartheid and genocide. The students have been met with violent repression from police and smears from their university administrators, corporate media, pro-genocide lawmakers, and Zionist groups. In early May, I was joined by 4 students and 1 professor from university across the U.S. who've been part of the encampments. While organizing their campuses to demand divestment, they've experienced firsthand not just arrests and violation of their civil rights, but the broad and growing support of their communities and by Palestinian civil society. Remember, we heard Donald Trump fault the president of Colombia. Why? Because she was being tolerant of the protesters. But that's the American way. Trump is contradicting everything he has been supposed to stand for in the past, and I am completely disillusioned at this point in time. Because Zionist mobs had attacked the encampment while police stood by. One student, Ahmed, said, this was at UCLA. The LAPD labeled him a focal point for attack. It was simply unbelievable for them to first allow us to be attacked and then use it as the reason for the sweep. He told the Electronic Intifada. Sheriff I, a member at Columbia University Apartheid Divest, Sharif I, that's his name, abbreviated. A member of Columbia University Apartheid Division described the New York Police Department attack on student happened several days before. Just watch the first 2 minutes. You hear tasers going off, students are screaming throughout, they're thrown to the ground, assaulted. We see police throw student downstairs as cop push away the press. This video is just 5 minutes of what happened. Absolutely horrific. A lot of it was incredibly vicious, very fascist. And frankly, in the same beat, university president, Minouche Shafik constantly said she was doing this to keep the students safe. So ironic and so much of a contradiction to have a university president frame this entire situation this way. He added, the camp was the safest place on campus. It was loving, beautiful. It created an amazing sense of community. So many of us had felt for the first time we had a space on the campus. Rice Green, a graduate student, and here it says University of Indiana, but there is no University of Indiana. There is Indiana University, from which I earned my PhD. And a writer with fairness and accuracy in reporting told us snipers were scored onto campus by university administrators and set positions on the roof of a building overlooking the encampment. IU admin escort snipers on day 3 of Gaza encampment. The encampment is full of student, faculty, and community members, including young children. He talked about his arrest by police. Just because we put up 2 tents in a park, he was banned from campus for 5 years. Here's another tweet. Pig singled out Green BJ for arrest. Not only are they arresting people under a statute that is likely illegal, but they're doing so selectively. These jackbooted effing fascists will stop at nothing to protect IU's complicity in the Gaza genocide. And of course, I find that profoundly troubling since I myself am an alum. Meanwhile, to return to the guy who, in all probability, will be our next president, Trump slams Biden for halting bomb deliveries to Israel and siding with Hamas. This is bad. Former President Trump is criticizing President Biden's decision to halt the delivery of bombs to Israel, accusing him of taking the side of Hamas terrorists. Remember, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. I stand with Hamas. Trump claimed that delaying weapon shipment was a victory for Hamas, which had previously attacked Israel. Trump further accused Biden of siding with terrorists and questioning the safety of American hostages being held by Hamas. Biden had reportedly warned Israeli PM Netanyahu against launching an offensive in Rafah, a region in southern Gaza where Hamas is believed to be located. This warning reflects a growing division between Biden and Netanyahu as a Biden admin expressed concern about the potential for increased tension and bloodshed in the Middle East. Frankly, it's ridiculous that Trump should be attacking Biden for withholding bombs being used to commit genocide. I mean, that's just insulting. And yet here we have Trump leading in 5 of 6 swing states. New York